Hi everyone, welcome to RightShip's GHG Rating webinar. Before we begin, let me explain how to participate in today's session. First of all, if you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please press the help button, which is the yellow box with a question mark at the bottom right of your screen. This will help you for all your common issues, and just send us a text message through the platform if you have any further problems. We also sent you a troubleshooting guide with your webinar reminder email, which may provide some assistance should you need it. We welcome your questions during today's event. To submit a question, simply type them into the question window on the left of your screen and then hit the blue submit button. We'll be answering as many questions as possible during the Q&A session that will follow the main presentation, but also feel free to send in your questions at any time and they'll be added to our queue. If at any time you are having any difficulties with the audio or with advancing the slides, try hitting your F5 key, which will refresh the webinar presentation. Please also be aware that today's session will be recorded and we'll have a version of it available on our YouTube channel shortly. You'll be notified by email when this archived file is available. So thanks again everyone for joining us. My name's Hannah Gibney. I'm a Marketing and Communications Coordinator at RightShip. I'll be facilitating today's session and the Q&A at the end. And presenting we have Kris Fumberger, who's our Sustainability Manager, and Sarah Braude, who's a Senior Sustainability Officer. Thanks for joining us, guys.
No problem. Hi everyone.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Hannah.
So I might just hand over to Sarah to run through the agenda quickly.
Sure. So just to give you a quick indication of where we're heading in today's webinar, we'll just touch on a bit about RightShip for those who don't know, and then we'll get into more detail around the greenhouse gas rating itself, and then give you an update on basically what we're seeing in the market and applications of the greenhouse gas rating. And then we'll touch on a few new initiatives and research that we've conducted. So I'll hand over to Kris to just give the rundown on RightShip.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'll introduce RightShip. So we're a global organisation offering 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week service. We focus our efforts in safety of the maritime environment and also sustainability. So basically any ocean-going vessel that carries cargo, we collect information and distribute that to our customers for use, trying to improve safety and sustainability. Today we're focusing on sustainability and how that's growing in the maritime market. And so today RightShip has about over 300 customers worldwide, which includes ship owners, charterers, banks, insurance companies and others out there. And what we'll focus on is how they're using their GHG rating and using that in the market to assist the market become more efficient.
So I'll now give you a rundown of the maritime industry and decarbonisation. So the Paris Agreement back in 2015 was a clear market signal that the world was now prioritising carbon reduction. Unfortunately, the shipping industry was actually left out of that. As of a year ago though, the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, introduced the industry's first greenhouse gas reduction strategy. So that was a year ago, kind of approaching a year ago soon now. That's important because shipping actually moves around 90% of goods worldwide, and that contributes overall to global emissions 3%. 3% global emissions. So it's quite a lot when we look at it and we think about it. In terms of the industry taking actions towards that, there is movement at the station and things happening. For example, we had Maersk recently announced earlier this year that they were hoping to be carbon neutral by 2050, and they spoke about the importance of innovation and technology in meeting that goal.
Great, thanks for that, Sarah. Clearly there's a strong market signal there. And maybe now, Kris, do you want to talk about how the GHG rating is, working with the industry and assisting to respond to the market pressure and to reduce emissions from shipping. Do you want to take that away, Kris?
Thanks, Hannah. So what is the RightShip's GHG rating? So in the introductory webinar, we spoke about what it is and we went into a lot of detail, but I think the key concepts here are that it's based on the amount of carbon dioxide per tonne nautical mile that a ship emits. So that's how we compare vessels against each other. And we use the IMO's own regulation, the EEDI, or RightShip's EVDI, to basically compare those ships. So we look to bring all those, the reason why we use the amount of CO2 per tonne nautical mile is to bring all ships onto a level playing field. So they're all on the same basis of measurement and the same set speed and the same engine power when they get measured against each other. That's a really crucial point, is bringing them all into that level playing field. And the other piece is responding to fleet dynamics. So every day there's new ships entering into the market and there's older ships being scrapped. So our rating basically updates as these new ships come in and older ships leave the market. So basically it's what we term as dynamic, or it takes into account these new, generally more efficient ships coming in and older ships leaving the market. So GHG emissions ratings do change over time. So I mentioned about how we like to keep everyone on a level playing field and have an equal amount of comparison, and that's what we do on this like-for-like basis. So we basically compare ships to their peers, or bulk carriers to bulk carriers, container ships to other container ships, and tankers to tankers. And how we do this is basically using their deadweight, or basically how much cargo they carry. So it's all about how much CO2 they emit for the amount of cargo they carry and how far they travel. The main metric is looking at ships, that peer group of comparison, the plus or minus 10% of their deadweight, and then comparing them against each other. So if you look here, there's a bulk carrier here, and you can see a little box around those number of vessels. So on the x-axis, you've got the deadweight tonne, or how large a vessel is, and on the y-axis is the amount of CO2 that's emitted per vessels. And as you can see, as the ships get larger, they're emitting less CO2. And in terms of that box there, we'll go into an actual case on the next slide of how we compare them. And here we basically zoom in now straight into that box, and again you've got the deadweight on the bottom axis, amount of CO2 on the y-axis. You can see the black line across the middle there is basically the reference line, which is set by IMO. All new ships have to get below the reference line, and you can see each dot there represents an actual ship. So that's the amount of CO2 that it emits. And the aim here is basically to be as low as you possibly can on the graphic. So all the ships down the bottom of the graphic are A and B rated, for example, and the ones at the top are F and G rated, where you don't want to be. So the example vessel is B rated, or a very efficient vessel. Its EVDI is 2.233, which is 2.2 grams of CO2 per tonne nautical mile. Size is about 209,000 deadweight tonnes, and you can see there the peer groups 188 to 230 deadweight tonnes. So basically what this is demonstrating is where that ship sits in its peer group. So I mentioned earlier about the plus or minus 10% of the deadweight. So you can see there that it's B rated, it's one of the most efficient ships, and it's really pushing the boundaries in terms of efficiency and doing a really good job in that space.
Great, thanks for that, Kris. Good to get a bit of an overview. And now I might throw over to you, Sarah, to get down into the weeds and talk a bit about the methodology sitting behind the GHG rating and how it's been reviewed by peer parties.
So DMVGL conducted an independent methodology review. I think it was back in 2015 now, Kris, is that right?
Yep.
So we basically asked them to review 3 key questions. Number 1 was, how does the EVDI compare to the EEDI? Second question was, does it provide a level playing field? That kind of fair and robust comparison piece. And the third question was, design versus operational, so how the design-based metric compares to, say, operational data. So those are the three key areas that they looked at. So just up the top here, we've got the equation for the EEDI and the EVDI from those IMO regulations, and this is what we use to basically calculate the CO2 emissions. So basically the major components that go into this equation, it looks really complicated, but the major ones for consideration are the engine size, so the main and auxiliary engines, the speed of the vessel, the fuel consumption relating to the engines, and how much cargo is being carried. So those are the key factors. There are others, but those are kind of the main ones that are informing the equation. So once DNVGL looked into all of this, the results, there were two key results in my mind, and one of those was that the EEDI and the EVDI are in alignment. Oh, sorry, the EVDI is in alignment with the EEDI. So that what we're saying here is that the RightShip methodology, which mirrors the IMO methodology, is in alignment. There's no reason for people to be worried about differences in calculations because they are inherently the same. And the second result is that there is an incentive for owners to basically submit their documentation to RightShip because that enables us to improve the robustness of the data that is feeding into this equation.
In terms of the second question around, does it provide a fair and robust comparison or that level playing field? You can see up on the screen here, we've basically looked at the peer group review of vessels. So they picked a group of 10,444 bulk carriers, which is basically the whole bulk carrier fleet, and then they looked to evaluate how the peer groups compare against each other. So we've got a summary up on our website at rightship.com/GHG rating. But basically what they did was they took that set of 10,000 bulk carriers and then compared them against each other and looked at, is the plus or minus 10% comparison factor the most robust and most the best option to use? So they looked at, is a peer group of 2% comparison better or 20%, and went through all different ranges like that. And overall they came up with the outcome that as it is, the 10% comparison factor is the most robust factor to use, and it works as intended, which basically means it's a really good comparison of how efficient ships are compared to each other on that design basis. And the third question is around that operational versus design question, and is RightShip's GHG rating based on a design metric the right metric for the market? So this would be one of my favourite conversations to have with ship owners, charterers, and basically anyone in the industry. So what we did was we asked DNVGL to try and shed some light on this, and very, very tough conversation to have with ship owners, with charterers and class societies and anyone in between. But what we asked them to do was basically look at, well, if a ship is, say, at their design speed, roughly 75% of their speed, or if they're slow steaming, is a more efficient ship by RightShip's GHG rating or the EEDI guidelines, is a more efficient ship going to be more efficient at those two speeds, or are we seeing different results here? And you can see the graphic on the right is basically comparing two vessels against each other. And in this case, you've got, you can see there that the vessel on the bottom, the A-rated vessel, uses less CO2 to do the same amount of work, and the inefficient vessel, it uses a lot more CO2. But this is not only holds at 75% of the engine capacity, but also too, if you're slow steaming at say 40 or 50% of the engine capacity, you also see a large variation in the amount of CO2 it's emitting, meaning that the more efficient ship is always emitting less CO2 than the inefficient ship. So basically that relationship holds true. It does converge a little bit as you slow the ships right down. The amount of CO2 gets a little bit closer, but in general, the more efficient ship will be more efficient whatever speed you're setting it at. So generally we get charter parties, you know, they might set the charter party speed at 12 knots, for example, or 14 knots. Well, if you're picking a more efficient ship through RightShip's GHG rating, you're always going to get a more efficient outcome. So if the charter party says 12 knots, and you look at a really efficient A-rated ship compared to an inefficient ship, every time the efficient ship will come out on top and give you better fuel economy and also savings to the charterer.
Great, thanks, Kris. Now, Sarah, do you want to have a chat about sustainability and energy efficiency and how all that fits into the vetting process at RightShip?
Sure. So in terms of the greenhouse gas rating and who is using it, it's always good to cover this off for everyone's knowledge. So currently we have over 118 organisations using the greenhouse gas rating, and together those account for about 1 in 5 vessels being chartered. So it's quite a lot. And of the total customer base using it, we've got 60 charterers included in that figure. And then more recently, we've had a few banks who are interested in the greenhouse gas rating and utilising it. And of course, ports who have been long-time users of the greenhouse gas rating. Most recently, a couple of months ago, you might have seen in the media the Port of Buenos Aires included RightShip's greenhouse gas rating as a incentive provider under their port incentive scheme. On the chartering side, chartering groups who are using the greenhouse gas rating to pick more efficient ships, we have most of those actually employ no F&G policies, so that means that they will not charter any vessels that are F or G rated. And we actually have some who've gone even further than no F&Gs. So we have some charterers even looking at E and D rated vessels now. So D represents the average, and so we're seeing off the back of that some real impacts in the market, particularly amongst ship owners who are asking lots of questions, which is good. So this graph on the screen basically shows that in the past 12 months, sorry, I should just outline the graph. Firstly, the graph shows how many upgrades, efficiency upgrades we have registered and verified here at RightShip. So by that I mean ship owners who have undertaken efficiency upgrades to their vessels, and they're looking to have that incorporated into the greenhouse gas rating, and that's directly off the back of a lot of these charterers having certain rules in place, such as no F&G, which is impacting the market and making ship owners want to make changes to make sure they're still competitive in the chartering world. So the graph shows that in the last year we've had over 290 of these upgrades registered in our system. So that's more than one every day, and about a year ago it used to be, a couple of years ago it used to be more like one a month. So it's been quite a big jump in the number of upgrades that we are putting through the system. And just before we move on, I should just mention on that last slide that most of the upgrades that we get through are related to propulsion systems. And in our last webinar, for those that listened to that, you might remember that we touched on Odfell, and they undertook a lot of upgrades to their fleet in this area, which resulted in 20% improvement. So quite substantial. Now I'll hand over to Kris to run through some new initiatives that we have going at the moment.
Thanks, Sarah. Happy to highlight some of the patterns that we're seeing or market trends that we're seeing come along. So just picking up on your sort of propulsion and energy efficiency upgrades and so forth, we've got a graphic up here which is basically trying to look at the specific fuel consumption of vessels and also the engine size over time. So what this is telling us is like you're saying, that we've seen some massive moves and massive trends and shifts in the market over recent times. So Bottom axis here is basically time, so starting around 99, 2000 to basically today. And then we also have what do we got here? We've got the average power of the vessels in that sort of green colour, and then the SFC in the bluey type colour. And as you can see, back in 99, 2000, the engine sizes were generally a little bit smaller than today. Specific fuel consumption was roughly set a flat trend over time until you see there in sort of 2013 when the IMO introduced the EEDI guidelines, and you can see both metrics had a steep downward curve. So you see the engine sizes reduce and also the specific fuel consumption. So your engine makers like MAN and so forth have done a lot of work in this space to basically improve the specific fuel consumption. And we get a lot of questions around this about, my ship was built in a certain time and it's not by IMO guidelines and so forth. How can this be? Well, this basically outlines how it is. So, for example, a huge trend in making ships in the mid-2000s, 2008, just before the global financial crisis. There are a lot of ships on order, a lot built and delivered in sort of 2010 to 2012 and so forth. But you can see a lot of those ships that were delivered had really large engines with specific fuel consumption that wasn't great, to be honest. And then more recently, we've seen that massive trend towards efficiency, and this is not only IMO guidelines, but other market factors in terms of fuel price really changed over that time off the back of the global financial crisis, and also to market trends like RightShip's GHG rating. We're seeing, like Sarah just outlined, massive difference in how ship owners are building new ships, how they're putting in orders for new ships, and also how they're retrofitting those ships. So improving not only the propulsion system, but also economising how the ships actually operate. So they're changing how they operate over the time. So I'll hand back to Sarah now to talk about, in terms of, I've just outlined some of the trends that we're seeing, but in terms of where you want to build your next ship and which shipyard to use, I'll hand that over to Sarah to talk about some of the work we're doing there.
So we've recently developed an interactive map of sorts, which looks at the greenhouse gas rating spread of new builds. And up on here, we're looking at new builds in China, Japan and Korea. Well, actually just China and Korea here, but we can do it for any country that may be of interest. And basically what we're showing here is down to the individual shipyard level, which shipyards are building which ships in terms of what greenhouse gas rating they have. So some shipyards might build more efficient ships and other shipyards might build less efficient ships. And we are working with a variety of ship owners who are looking to use this information to help inform their new builds, and we're able to get down to the specifics, such as the yard or the engine model, those kinds of details that you'd be interested in perhaps learning more about if you were looking to build a new ship and where you should build that new ship. So we've also had interest from banks in this kind of information, as it could help perhaps drive how they're financing new vessels and the attached finance terms that go with that. Kris, did you want to take us through this next slide?
Can do, Sarah. Thanks for that. So we've spoken a lot about trends in the marketplace and how individual things like shipyard data are now getting used by banks and so forth. I just wanted to touch on what we're seeing in terms of supply chain. So ship owners and their ships are obviously crucial within the supply chain, and we're seeing charterers want to understand their supply chain impacts a lot more. They really want to understand now what the carbon dioxide emissions are for their supply chains. They know that generally they're large. How large are they? So do they compare, for example, mining customers moving iron ore or coal? Does it compare to their mining operations, or is it a lot smaller? And these are some of the questions we're helping our customers answer. So we've got an example here about what we're terming, we've got a new carbon accounting tool, which we plan to do a webinar in the future, more detail on, but we're seeing a lot of charterers want to understand their supply chain, and they're putting a lot of time and effort into this. So what we've got on screen here is basically one shipment from Port Hedland here in Australia up to China with some iron ore. You can see the vessel specifics there, but the main point out of this is the amount of carbon dioxide emitted for this journey. So just over 2,000 tonnes to move it one way. You've also got ballast legs included there and any disports along the way. So for example, if they dropped half of the cargo at the port here and half at another port. But why a charterer is interested in this, and that is very much for them to understand and their supply chain and understand any material risks within that supply chain. So they're getting more and more questions about how large are the emissions associated with that, and how are you managing it. So quite an easy way to look at that is to basically say, well, we can give you an indication of how many, what the carbon emissions look like, and then in terms of managing those emissions, a lot of those charterers that already exclude, for example, F&G rated ships are already doing a lot of work to manage those emissions. So what's the benefit to that charterer? They might be saving 5–10% of CO2 out of their supply chain. So we can actually quantify that and give those results to the charterer. And we're doing this on a yearly basis. We've just delivered one charterer's results for the third year, and they had a 7% reduction in CO2 over that time. So they're really excited about this. And now, so that's carbon accounting, and now I'll hand back to Sarah to talk about something that's happening in 9 months in terms of the sulphur cap. Thanks, Sarah.
So as Kris just mentioned, we've got some upcoming regulations happening in the industry, which are 9 months away. I think I'll focus on the sulphur cap here, which I'm sure you are all well aware of, and probably very busy looking at ways to meet those regulations. So one of the common questions we get asked is, if I install a scrubber, will that impact my rating? And we've had conversations with various parties, including Class, about this, and the operation of a scrubber relates mostly to the auxiliary engines, and is basically an operational measure and an operational event, if you like, or happening in that scheme of things, whereas the greenhouse gas rating is using a design-based metric, so that IMO EEDI guidelines. So currently, as it stands, a scrubber, if you're operating a scrubber, it won't impact your greenhouse gas rating, but we recognise that obviously operationally it has an impact, but in terms of the rating, not the case.
Great, thanks Kris and Sarah. So that concludes our formal presentation for today. And just before we launch into our Q&A session, just a reminder that if you have any specific questions related to your fleet, please contact Kris and Sarah and the team offline. A copy of the webinar will be forwarded to you to your emails that you registered with, and it will also be available on our RightShip YouTube channel, so you can share with your network. So we'll expect that that'll be up there on the coming weeks, but we'll let you know when that's live. There'll also be an email coming through to you which will ask you for some feedback on the webinar. We really appreciate your response with these ones. It takes less than a minute, and it really helps us to understand what's worked well and not so well, and to improve our future sessions. So if you haven't already, please send through your questions for Sarah and Kris. So yeah, start sending them through now. Great. Okay, so the first question we've got come through is, what is the main method that I can improve my GHG rating? Kris, do you want to take that one?
Sure, Hannah, thanks for that. So yeah, question we get asked a lot by a lot of ship owners, especially when they fall down to the F&G ratings. One that we really do a lot of work working with the ship owners to try and give them the best options they can. So we basically say that there are options out there. We've seen a lot of vessel owners do this in the past, and we're getting a record number, like we mentioned in the webinar, record number of requests coming in. So main thing to look at your basically your propulsion system. So whether that's rudders or fins or whatever ways to improve the propulsion. So generally it's about trying to make the vessel go faster with less work on the engine. And the other one is obviously in the engine room. So whether that's engine modifications, turbochargers, those kind of things. So again, it's about using less fuel and to get through the water as fast as you can. But I think the main point here that you need to be very aware of is if you do modifications, and we're seeing it more and more, is making sure that you can demonstrate the benefits of those modifications. So whether that's through something like, say, a lot of ship owners at the moment seem to be doing CFD modelling to demonstrate that their vessels improve their performance, or getting a study or something like that to actually demonstrate the percentage improvement. So like a manual from a supplier, like a duct supplier, that's not going to provide that actually demonstration. We actually need to see some hard facts of the individual vessel improving their performance by X amount. So whether that's 2% or 5%, or in the case of the Oddfell vessel we've mentioned a few times, that was 20% improvement. So they actually provided a study that demonstrated that they improved by 20% when they're on the water, so with their re-sea trial. And just another one, just to touch on, we've had a recent ship owner, they plan to dry dock their vessel soon to undertake some modifications and improvements to the vessel. In the meantime, they were still able to get a charter party fixed by working with us to buy carbon offsets for the journey. So it was a 68-day journey, 6,000 tonnes of carbon, which is a lot of carbon, and they were able to work with us. So that's another option that we could explore as well with some ship owners.
Okay, so Kris, we've got a couple of questions about clarifying with the scrubbers. So if will a scrubber installation influence the GHG rating in a positive way? Or Sarah, would you like to take that one?
Yep, I can take that one. So yeah, apologies if that wasn't clear when we were talking earlier. If you install a scrubber, it will not impact the greenhouse gas rating either positively or negatively, so there'll be no change factoring in there. We've had discussions with class to confirm how a scrubber fits in terms of engine power, and in this case, it's not going to impact the equation. So there should not be any issues there.
And just to clarify, so sulphur is not a greenhouse gas. So our rating's on CO2 or carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. So sulphur doesn't impact. A lot of people think that because we're scrubbing or you're scrubbing out the sulphur, you're going to have an improved performance. It's not a greenhouse gas for starters, and also too, it's operationally it's going to actually use more fuel on the vessel. But as Sarah said, it's not going to impact the GHG.
Yeah. So the other question we had was, if a vessel's been in dry dock, will it change the GHG rating? And Sarah, do you want to take that again?
Yep, sure. So when a vessel, that's also another common question that we get day to day here in the office. In terms of when a vessel does get dry docked, I guess maintenance is performed, things like cleaning the propeller, cleaning the hull, those kinds of things. So if it was just that, you were perhaps cleaning the hull or polishing the propeller or respraying the hull, that will not impact the greenhouse gas rating, because that's more of something that you will impact operationally, and as we've mentioned, this is a design-based metric. However, if you dry dock your vessel and actually undertake some of those upgrades or retrofits to your vessel, which that could include things like installing a muse duct or a propeller boss cap fin, those kinds of things can impact the rating, so long as you get the impact modelled, which Kris touched on CFD modelling before a little bit. So it's all about basically demonstrating the impact of those retrofits on the vessel. So that's, so if you do those, we can factor it in. Otherwise, I think that answers that question.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Sarah. Now, this one might be a good one for Kris. Kris, why does the GHG rating change over time?
Yep, another common question, and basically, I think the best way to explain it is the GHG rating is dynamic, so it does change over time. So as new ships come in, so we're always seeing new ships generally more efficient enter the market, so whether they're A, B or C rated, and older ships generally are more E, F and G rated. The inefficient ships be scrapped or leave the market, and we're seeing a large spike in that at the moment with Cape-size ships because of the market conditions. So basically, you're getting more efficient ships coming in on top, and they're pushing down the ships through the rungs, and as older inefficient ships leave, they're leaving the market, so ships basically replace them. So another piece to that question is about the time frame that ships sit in each rating, and generally a ship 25 years, and it sits in the rating bands over those different times. So it's hard to give you exact answers on that, but generally you'd think a ship will move from the top, say A rating, right through the different bands and end up as a G rated ship after 25 years. But it's not always that way. It depends on the peer group. So if the ships it's getting compared to is a large group, so for example, Panamax ships, there's lots of bulkers in that range, so you compare to thousands of other ships. Whereas in the Cape fleet, for example, we've seen huge amount of scrapping recently and a lot of new builds, so they've really changed around. So like an average age ship's only 6 years old there. So in terms of ships sitting in the D or average range might only be 4 or 5, 6 years old, whereas historically they would have been 12 years old. So there's no exact answer on that, but we're happy to sort of talk ship owners through that over time.
Great. So another question we've got, how does the peer-to-peer comparison calculation take into account the actual fuel consumption of the vessel? Who would like to take that one?
Yep, happy to take that again. So just going back to that, like I just mentioned about the peer group, say with the Cape-size fleet. So the GHG rating's about, it's a design index, and as we mentioned earlier, it's about putting everyone on that equal footing, that equal playing field, so everyone gets measured on the same sea trial in the same conditions. How actual fuel consumption comes in, we don't take that into account at the moment. If someone can come up with a metric that fairly does that across all ship types, and we can be provided with the data, we're more than happy to consider that. But at the moment, we don't have a fair and reasonable way to do that. And what we're about is trying to be fair, reasonable and transparent to ship owners. So it's a design index, and that's what we rate ships on at the moment. It's about rating like-for-like ships. So they say bulk carriers to bulk carriers of the same size, and container ships and general cargo and so on. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Kris. I've just seen another question pop up here, which is why is my ship being screened by a charterer for my ship's greenhouse gas rating? So that's another one that we see a lot. We have a number at RightShip here. We've got a number of customers who have policies in place whereby they won't charter the less efficient ships. So the most common one is they'll have a no F&G policy. So that means they will not charter a ship that is F or G rated. And so customers of ours who vet ships on our platform will have that rule active, and as a ship gets screened, basically if the ship doesn't meet the no F&G policy, it will not be selected. So we do have ships who miss out on charters because of that, and that's off the back of these customers who are enacting such policies, which have really impacted the market, I guess, and actually started encouraging vessel owners to increase their rating to make sure that they're still able to get work and be competitive in the industry. So the impact has been quite positive from that perspective.
Great.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to say that those ship owners that have invested in those more efficient ships are getting that reward now, and that's great to see.
Yes.
That's one of the main aims, is we're not just focusing on the inefficient ships, but also the ones that have invested a lot of money in efficiency measures, and they're getting rewarded.
Yeah, and that's all visible as well
yep.
on the platform. So
Great, thanks. This one looks like it could be a good one for Kris. Would RightShip be willing to publish our sigma values on the GHG rating? This will provide vessel owners with more certainty in the long-term effects of their investment.
So it is a very good question. I assume by sigma values you mean the Z score or where you sit within the different ranges or bands, so the A to G. So for example, average ship is D-rated. It's basically in terms of the standard deviation from the mean, getting into a bit of maths there, but more than happy. Well, we do at the moment. So shippingefficiency.org is a free, open, transparent platform that anyone can log into for free and see their ship information. So not only what information we use behind the ship, but also the GHG rating. So say if it's A-rated, for example, might have a Z score or a sigma value over 2. So they're all published there. You can log in, see any ship floating around the world. In terms of what we actually see in terms of who's using those values, you're very much right that savvy ship owners are using those values and saying, well, I don't want to buy a second-hand ship, for example, that has a poor GHG rating, and I want to make sure that it's well rated. Another thing we're seeing a lot of is banks using that. So a lot of banks are now starting to only finance A, B and C rated ships, so the most efficient ships. And this is having a big impact in the market because they're the ones that are putting forward the capital to the ship owners, working with the ship owners to make sure that their long-term investment is going to be profitable for them. So this is something in terms of, charterers have been using this for a number of years. But more recently, last couple of years, banks are starting to use the GHG rating, and we're getting more and more requests. And I know there's a couple of banks on the line here, and some of them do use the rating, and we're seeing them strengthen their rules around that more and more. So this is really going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple of years.
Great, thanks, Kris. We've got another one here. RightShip mainly considers design factors for to figure out the GHG rating. Will RightShip consider calculating actual fuel consumption for the GHG rating in the near future?
Yep. So as mentioned, I think 2 or 3 questions ago, it is design-based metric. We think that's a way to have this on a level playing field, keep everyone on that same way, same sea trial, same shop test, everyone's compared in the same way. If there's a metric out there that's fair and reasonable to ship owners and puts their data in the right way, we're more than happy to consider that. But I suppose at the moment, one of the main concerns is just how the charter parties are generally set up in the bulk markets. And a charterer generally says, I want you to steam at a certain, say it's 12 knots. So the ship owner doesn't have a lot of, they can't operate their ship in a certain way. They're told how to operate the ship at what speed, or it might be 14 knots. So, but say tomorrow a charterer says, well, actually I need you to speed up and go faster and use more fuel. The ship owner can't impact that amount of fuel that's being used. So that's why we're concerned about and guarded against moving to an operational rating. But if we can overcome some of those factors, we'll look at it. But very much at the moment, it's about keeping everyone on a level playing field.
Great, thanks, Kris. So one, I think, for Sarah. Why is the size score different with our sister vessels within our fleet?
Yep. So I guess by size score, you could also mean maybe the EBDI/EEDI figure. And there's a number of reasons that could be. So generally speaking, we would expect sister vessels to be have similar values and similar ratings. There can be differences, that can be for a variety of reasons. You could have 2 sister ships, but one could have better fuel consumption related to the main engine, which could be the result for that difference, and similarly any other factors within the equation. Maybe it has a different speed relative to its sister under the reference conditions. So anything basically in the equation that we outlined before, if there's any differences in those figures between sisters, it can cause differences within the rating itself. The other reason could be perhaps that the vessel has not been verified yet in the system. Again, we wouldn't expect major fluctuations based on that, but it's always worth getting in touch with us, and we can help you get to the bottom of that exactly.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. So, Kris, back to you. How fair is it that the GHG rating is calculated even if an owner doesn't wish to participate with it, doesn't wish to give RightShip any information that might impact that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Just Sarah touched on the verification process. So RightShip's very much, we've been in operation for about 18 years. The GHG rating came into operation about 8 years ago. We've been very open and transparent with the market, having shipping efficiency and our own system key out there for ship owners to update their information. So we do have many thousands of pieces of information in there. We also collect it from shipyards and owners, managers, and everyone in between. So we do get from time to time ship owners don't want to participate, or they wish not to provide us information, and that's their right. There's no obligation for them to actually provide us with information. They can choose not to. We do have this, and we basically work with the owner. We encourage them to work with us, but if they choose not to, well, that's their right, and it's up to them how they do that. Yeah, I'm more than happy to have those discussions, and up to the individual owner. Not uncommon, but generally I think the owners that do work with us in a proactive and positive way, I think they get a lot of benefits out of the charter market in that space. Thanks, Hannah.
Great. Got another one. So someone's asking if only new vessels coming into the market can change their GHG rating, can influence the GHG rating of existing vessels on the market. That's what I take that to be. Sarah, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So basically any vessel can impact the pool of vessels in terms of the greenhouse gas rating. So you might have a new vessel that's entering the market which is top of the line in terms of efficiency. Maybe it's been designed optimally to cut through the water, so to speak, and be really efficient as it's sailing along. And you'd expect, obviously, on that basis that it would have quite a positive greenhouse gas rating, maybe A or B. In terms of older vessels, they can, as we've touched on, they can undergo various upgrades and efficiency improvements, which can improve their rating. So we process, say, lots of muse ducts. We get a lot of those in here, and depending on the size of the vessel and the impact that it's having, it can positively improve the rating. So I have seen vessels improve rating bands based on that. So it's not just the new vessels that can change the rating, so to speak. The older vessels can improve their ratings and overall change the pool of vessels within the greenhouse gas rating.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Kris, I think you were indicating that you want to take this one. Do RightShip have a simulator for changing the rating during the life of the vessel based on current market information?
As I alluded to earlier, no is a simple answer to that. We don't have a simulator. It's very much up to what is happening in the market. We do have plans to basically provide more information on that. As we develop the key system, we hope to have basically a tool that will give you more of an indication or simulate where the ship will go. If you want to know about individual ships, we're more than happy to take those questions at environment@rightship.com. In terms of actually the timeframes, as I mentioned earlier, it's all about the peer group and what's happening in that peer group. So I mentioned earlier about the Cape fleet or the, say, Newcastle Max vessels at the moment. So there's roughly just over 100 or so Newcastle Max vessels. In the next sort of 6 to 12 months, there's expected delivery of more than 20 new vessels. So in terms of simulating what's going to happen there, I think the market's going to change very dramatically in terms of where those ratings are for those sort of 100, 120 vessels. We're going to see a lot of those vessels come in at the top, A, B and C rated vessels. lot of vessels that are currently rated maybe E might drop to F fairly quickly, and a lot of them may not be that old. So we're going to see a huge change and a fairly dramatic change in that sort of Newcastle Max vessel soon. So that's one. But I used the Panamax bulkers earlier. I'll be pretty confident that there'll be really slow change in that peer group, because you've got thousands of vessels, so you need a lot of vessels coming in and a lot moving out to actually have that change. So long story short, it basically depends on how large your peer group is and where you're sitting in the market to actually work out how the different peer group or market will change. But yeah, if you're in one of those larger peer groups like the Panamax sort of size, then you'll get a lot slower rate of change, and it'll be many, many years before your vessel changes GHG rating. Thanks, Hannah.
Great. Okay. One which I think I'll send Sarah's way. How will the installation of BWTS influence the existing score of GHG rating?
Yeah, so BWTS is the ballast water treatment systems, for those who are wondering. So it's a similar story to how we treat scrubbers. So we've had conversations with Class again and various providers of those systems, and in the context of the greenhouse gas rating works, it will not impact the rating. But happy if you want to get in touch, we can answer any specific questions if you have, maybe against some of your specific vessels. We're happy to advise further if you're not sure. Hannah, any questions?
There's another one we have that is again talking about peer groups. So for Kris, we've noticed that the peer group contains a large range of vessels. Is there any possibility that the peer groups can be divided into smaller groups of vessels?
Yep, that's a really good question, and one we get quite often. So in terms of a lot, it depends how big your ship is, what peer group it sits in, but I'll go back to that Panamax example. There'll be thousands of ships within that peer group, and the reason is because when you're looking to say charter or finance for a bank one of those vessels, you want to know how efficient it is compared to all those other ships in that size range. So the size ranges are plus or minus 10% of the deadweight. In terms of why that's the case, well, we mentioned earlier about the third-party review that we did with DNVGL, or DNVGL did for us, and they basically went through and looked at whether the peer group should be smaller, say for example 2 or 4%, or whether they should be larger, up to 20% of the deadweight. What the conclusion they came to was 10% was quite a good range, and it covered whether you're a really large ship like a Cape size or whether you're down into a handy size. It covered a good number of ships and gave a really good representation of how efficient a ship is. So we're taking the guidance from that peer review from Class and moving with that. So the peer groups are set at plus or minus 10% at the moment.
Great. Thanks, Kris. Just looking through these. We've got lots of questions coming through, which is great.
From Stefan there about Flettner rotors, I think is a good one. Yeah, so is an installation of Flettner rotors change the GHG rating? Most definitely, Stefan, and we have a couple of examples of that in our... So Flettner rotors are basically a rotating rotor, that basically uses the wind to make propulsion power. So whether that's 10% of the ship's power or 20%, whatever it is. So we've got a couple of examples within our system of ships that have installed them and actually demonstrated the benefits to the ship, and their GHG ratings have improved. So anyone that wants to do it, it's basically free power from the wind. You obviously got to pay for the Flettner to be put in, but really exciting to see these, and these are the kind of modifications that we want to see. They're changing the industry landscape, and if we could get more of this, I'd be really excited, and this is what sort of makes us tick at our end, is when we see these ships do really good modifications like that.
Great. We probably just have time for another 2 questions, just because we're sort of pushing an hour and we promised a half-hour session. So I might send this one to Sarah. So Sarah, would you expect a 4 or 5-star rating vessel to have a good GHG rating? Or I think the question is, you would expect them to. However, we do see F-rated vessels in this group. Could you please elaborate on that?
Yep. So 4 or 5-star rating is referring to our risk rating, which is related to safety performance of vessels. So the risk rating, or the star rating, as some people call it, is different to the greenhouse gas rating. So they're not interdependent on each other in technical terms. So yeah, you could have a vessel that has a high star rating but a low greenhouse gas rating, or vice versa. Kris, I think we did some analysis on the safety rating of ships versus the greenhouse gas rating a few years ago.
Yep. And the outcome is we like to talk about a greener ship being a safer ship.
Yeah.
So we see that if you're burning less fuel, so basically you're more efficient, you're burning less fuel, generally you've got more money to have better standards on the ship, train the crew and do all those things. And we see a very strong correlation between your 4 and 5 star rated ships and sort of A, B and C rated ships. And the odd one flips through, might have a good risk rating, for example, even though it's F rated, but that's more to do with how the ship is operated and controlled rather than the efficiency of the ship.
Yeah.
And I think we have some updated data on that, which will be published soon on our insights page on RightShip.com. So we have lots of data insights about the safety and sustainability of the world's fleet, and you should see a case study coming up there in the coming weeks.
Very good job by our comms team.
Yeah. Thanks, Kris. So we've got one here. How often is a GHG rating updated for each particular ship?
Yep. So I think there's two parts to this. So because it's a design index, the GHG rating just needs to be updated, for example, by an owner once. So it's a once-off process. So say if it's a new ship today, they'll have an EEDI technical file, so send that into us, we'll update the information. If it's an older ship, an existing ship, then send in your shock tests and so forth, and we'll update that once off. And then the other part of that question may be, how often is the model recalculated? So every 24 hours the model runs. So for example, today, if a new ship comes in, that'll go into the queue, it gets run against all the other ships and gets a GHG rating against all those other ships. And probably another point that to point out, if a ship owner is building a new ship or a bank's looking to finance a new ship, and we have this quite regularly, we've got the ability to sort of look into the future and give an indication of where a ship will sit on the GHG rating. So say 3 or 4 years in advance, when, if you're looking to contract a new ship today for a bank, we have a couple of banking customers who contact us and say, what's the rating going to look like? We want to know how our asset will perform when it actually gets on the water. So we've got an ability to actually look at that and give them an indication. So that's something it's not perfect, because obviously we've got 3 years worth of movement, but because generally the vessels move fairly slow through the ranks, we can give an indication.
Great, and I think we'll just finish off with one final question. I might turn this one in Sarah's direction. So is there any other simple method besides EPL for upgrading a GHG rating?
So I think we've outlined a little bit on the methods for improving the rating via retrofits or efficiency upgrades. So we always recommend to either get in touch with us, but also to get in touch with class or technology providers, perhaps your engine manufacturer. They're all really good parties to talk to about what kind of modification will suit your vessel. Obviously you get different modifications that suit different vessels, so it's always best to talk with them. As I mentioned before, I see lots of muse ducts coming to us, lots of propeller boss cap fins.
We need more Flettner rotors, Sarah.
Yeah, they're my favourite one, yeah. So whenever I see one of those, I always get really excited. Obviously lots of media as well lately on Flettner rotors, with various ships looking into that or installing it. So there's numerous methods, so feel free to get in touch with us directly or the class or technology providers.
Yeah, great, thank you. So I suppose that will wrap up the Q&A there. So as Sarah and Kris have both mentioned, if you do have any questions specific to your vessel or your fleet, and a few of them have come through to us tonight, please contact the team offline at environment@rightship.com. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we'll be sending around a survey and would really appreciate any feedback you might have on this session. So that will just help us to improve future sessions and make sure they're nice and tailored. We'll also be sending you a video recording of the session. So please, of course, feel free to share this with your colleagues and within your networks. So that'll just be up on our YouTube channel. So in the coming months, I think Kris mentioned earlier, we'll be hosting a follow-up session on the application of the GHG rating within our carbon accounting tool, which we were discussing earlier on. So if you're interested in coming along and learning about how we're helping our customers to measure, manage, and will, in some cases, recently offset their Scope 3 emissions, it'll be great if you could join us for that session as well. So we'll be sending you more information and some sign-up links on that shortly. So just to sign off, thanks to Kris and Sarah for presenting with us today, and thanks to all of you online for joining us. It's for those of you in our time zone, it's time to go home because it's the end of the day, but for all you starting your day in Asia and in Europe, I hope you have a great day. We'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye.